For 10 years, she had been a shadow behind her husband. Captain Eleanor Vance had chosen to conceal her identity as the only daughter of a powerful major general, all to preserve the purity of her love. She believed her quiet support would be his anchor, never imagining it would become the excuse for her husband, Major Derek Hogan, to sink into a morass of ambition, betray his uniform, and trample upon their sacred vows. The villain thought himself a master hunter, laying a brutal disciplinary trap to strip his wife of her commission and clear the way for his young lover. But he never knew he was provoking a wild orchid with a heart of steel. When honor is sacrificed upon the altar of greed, a phoenix will rise from the ashes of shattered faith. Ladies and gentlemen, let your hearts settle as we delve into the dramatic and deeply human corners of A Verdict on Honor. A story of awakening, pride, and the ultimate price of betrayal awaits you. The night was so still in the base housing community at Fort Bragg that you could hear the heavy dew dripping from the leaves of the old magnolia tree outside. Inside the third-floor apartment, the single lamp cast a pale yellow light onto the dining table, creating pools of desolate cold. Eleanor sat there, motionless as a statue, her vacant eyes fixed on the dinner that had long gone cold. On the table, the pot roast she had slow-cooked since the afternoon now had a congealed layer of white fat on its surface. The side of roasted potatoes and green beans no longer sent up spirals of comforting steam. Everything was as lifeless and withered as the heart of the woman who had spent nearly a decade of her youth as the steadfast home front for an ambitious officer. She glanced at the grandfather clock against the wall. It was 1 a.m. The hour and minute hands met at their zenith before silently separating again, like the two people in this marriage, drifting further and further apart. She sighed softly, the small sound dissolving into the oppressive silence. This wasn't the first time she had waited up, but tonight, the keen intuition of a soldier and a wife told her a storm was gathering just beyond that door. Having lived with Derek Hogan long enough, Eleanor knew every rhythm of his breath, every one of his habits. When he was just a lieutenant from a small town, with nothing to his name, he would tiptoe in late, afraid to wake her, sometimes carrying a small bag of warm roasted peanuts or a wildflower plucked hastily from the roadside. Now, with the silver oak leaf of a major secure on his shoulders, when late-night meetings with staff became an unassailable excuse, Derek came home with the air of a king bestowing his presence upon a servant. The low rumble of a car engine approaching the wrought iron gate cut through her thoughts. Headlights swept across the window, casting dancing shadows on the wall like fleeting ghosts. Eleanor flinched. Instinctively, she stood, smoothed the simple bun at the nape of her neck, and adjusted her modest, butter-yellow silk pajamas. Though her heart was a battlefield of hurt and exhaustion, the ingrained habit of an officer's wife compelled her to greet her husband looking as presentable as possible. The heavy oak door swung open. Derek Hogan stepped inside, bringing with him the chill of the night and a complex odor that assaulted Eleanor's sensitive nose. It wasn't just the heavy scent of expensive whiskey or the stale smoke clinging to the fabric of his dress uniform. It was also the unfamiliar fragrance of a woman's perfume, cloying, sweet, and aggressively provocative. That scent was like an invisible slap across her face, causing the nascent smile on her lips to vanish, freezing into a pained, awkward line. Derek staggered. His tie loosened, his uniform shirt untucked, his eyes bloodshot with alcohol and lingering lust. He tossed his designer leather briefcase onto the sofa and collapsed beside it, not even bothering to glance at his wife. Suppressing a sigh, Eleanor moved forward and knelt to untie his polished dress shoes. Her movements were practiced and patient, just as she had stepped back all these years so he could focus on his career. "You're home," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly despite her effort to keep it steady. "Are you tired? I made that pot roast you like. Let me heat it up for you. A little food might help with the alcohol." Her care was met with a dismissive, irritated wave of his hand. He pried open his heavy eyelids and looked down at the woman kneeling at his feet. In his drunken haze, the image of Eleanor seemed faded, old-fashioned, and plain. He unconsciously compared her to the vibrant, stylish women from the party he had just left, her modest pajamas a world away from their daring, low-cut dresses that flaunted flawless skin. A baseless wave of disgust rose within him, and he spat out words as sharp as a razor. Just stop it. Aren't you tired of this? It's always food, food, food. Don't you have anything else to talk about? Look at you. You look more like the hired help than the wife of a field-grade officer. Go out and open your eyes. See how other officers' wives are. They're elegant, sophisticated, and they know how to behave. You just hang around the kitchen all day, smelling of grease. The sight of you makes me sick to my stomach. Each word was a hammer blow, driving nails into Eleanor's heart. She froze. Her hands, still holding his gleaming shoes, began to tremble. Her youth was buried in this kitchen. 10 years of quiet dedication in the army, content with her role as an administrative captain, just to be a solid foundation for him. 10 years without buying a designer lipstick, without indulging in a single glamorous evening gown, all to save every dollar so he could network, so he could maintain a polished image among his peers. And now, that silent sacrifice had become his excuse to call her plain, to insult her as unworthy. Eleanor didn't cry. Her tears had dried up long ago, flowing inward to drown her soul. She silently stood, placed the shoes neatly on the rack, and turned toward the dining table. She didn't want him to see the weakness in her eyes, and she certainly didn't want to argue with a drunk. But in that moment of turning away, memories of the early days flooded back, as vivid as yesterday, rubbing salt into her bleeding wounds. She remembered the cramped, 100-square-foot apartment that leaked during every storm when he was a poor young officer. He would hold her tight, his eyes burning with ambition and love, whispering promises into her ear. "Ellie, just bear with me a little longer. When I make it big, when I'm a senior officer, I'll make it all up to you. I'll spend my life making you happy. You're the only wife I'll ever have." Those vows, so sacred and sincere then, were now as light as the wind, swept away by the currents of money and power. Eleanor looked at the cold dinner and realized with bitter clarity that a man's heart could grow cold much faster than a forgotten meal. Success had changed everything. The rank on his collar had transformed the once gentle soldier into a faithless, arrogant, and cruel man. Derek staggered upstairs. The bedroom door slammed shut, a sound that seemed to separate their two worlds. Downstairs, Eleanor remained standing, consumed by a chilling loneliness. She reached out and touched the platter of food, her long fingers tracing the pattern on the porcelain. She was not a weak, ignorant woman. With the sharp intellect and perception inherited from her father, a major general, a fact she had hidden for a decade to keep their love pure, she knew exactly where that strange perfume came from. She also knew what his recent, frequent field training exercises truly were. A faint, cryptic, and bitter smile touched her lips. The look in her eyes was no longer one of mere endurance. A sharp, cold light glinted from beneath her long lashes. Eleanor began to clear the table. She scraped the pot roast into the trash can. The sound of the disposal whirring felt mournful. She washed each dish, the clinking of porcelain echoing in the silent night. She did everything with meticulous slowness, as if she were cleansing her own soul of its illusions of love. Tonight, she would sleep in the guest room again, leaving the king-sized bed in the master bedroom to her husband and his gilded dreams. But Derek Hogan didn't know that right here in this house, beside him, the wife he scorned was silently observing everything, like a patient hunter setting a net, waiting for the prey to walk into the trap. The silence of Eleanor tonight was not consent. It was the calm before the storm, a storm that would sweep away everything he so arrogantly believed he controlled. Outside, the rain began to fall harder, and the wind whistled through the window frames, sounding like a desolate cry. Eleanor turned off the dining room light. Darkness enveloped her small frame, but in that darkness, her eyes remained wide open, alert and resolute. This play had only just begun, and her role as the long-suffering wife had to be played to perfection, at least until the curtain was finally raised on her true identity and power. The harsh morning sun of the Carolina sandhills pierced the reinforced glass of the brigade headquarters, glinting off the brass nameplate that read, "Major Derek Hogan, Deputy S3. Hogan leaned back in his leather executive chair, swiveling slowly, his eyes sweeping over the bustling training grounds below with a look of smug satisfaction. From this vantage point, He saw the young soldiers drilling tirelessly as mere pawns in a chess game. He was confident he had already won. He believed that everything he possessed, the power over subordinates' careers, the respect of his men, and the whispers of his promotion to the Brigade S3 position next quarter, was the fruit of his own brilliant talent and relentless effort. He had forgotten, or perhaps deliberately erased, the image of his administrative captain wife, who had stayed up countless nights correcting every comma in his operational plans when he was just starting out. A soft, familiar knock sounded at the door, making the corner of Hogan's mouth twitch into a smirk. Sergeant Tiffany Monroe entered, bringing with her the same heady Chanel fragrance that overpowered the subtle scent of the Earl Grey tea Eleanor always brewed for him. Tiffany wore her Army service uniform, but the white shirt underneath was tailored just a little too tightly, accentuating curves that Eleanor, in her modest pajamas, never revealed. "Major, the detailed report on the supply depot upgrade project is finished." Tiffany placed the file on his desk, her long fingers, painted a deep crimson, brushing lightly against the back of his hand. It was a subtle gesture, but enough to ignite the flames of desire in a man drunk on power. Hogan grabbed her hand, pulling her toward him. "Only you understand me, Tiff. In this brigade, without you, I feel like I'm suffocating under mountains of dry reports and the scrutinizing gaze of that captain wife of mine at home." Tiffany nestled coquettishly into his embrace, her voice as sweet as honey. "Oh, you exaggerate, sir. Captain Vance is so meticulous and careful." "But, Derek," she purred, "in this day and age, you need innovation, a fresh perspective. If we keep doing things by the book like she does, how will the brigade ever get ahead?" Tiffany deliberately used the word company before correcting herself, a vicious psychological trick to remind Hogan that this brigade was a gold mine he was poised to control, and Eleanor was the boulder holding him back from its riches. Hogan's brow furrowed, the cigarette between his fingers glowing red. In his mind, the image of Eleanor in her grease-stained apron from the night before materialized, a stark contrast to Tiffany's vibrant, youthful allure. He began to see Eleanor's presence in the S1 admin office as a thorn in his side, a blemish on the perfect portrait of his life. He feared the gossip, that the boss's wife looked plain and unsophisticated. He feared Eleanor's gentle but piercing gaze, which seemed to remind him of the lean years he was desperately trying to forget. "You're right," Hogan growled, his face turning cold and menacing. "Her thinking is obsolete. She runs the admin shop like it's still the 1980s. I'm planning a major personnel shakeup. A crucial position like Chief of S1, which also oversees supply logistics, can't be held by someone so passive and out of touch." Tiffany smirked, a cunning glint in her eye. "But she's your wife, officially, and she's never made a major mistake. Getting rid of her won't be easy. You need a pretext, a serious, undeniable offense to shut everyone up and make her leave in disgrace." The two adulterers huddled together, plotting under the morning sun. They were oblivious to the fact that across the quad, in a simple administrative office, Eleanor Vance was standing by the window, looking toward the S3 office. She couldn't hear their words, but through a pair of high-powered, military-grade binoculars, a memento from her father, she saw their clandestine embrace and Tiffany's fawning gestures. Eleanor didn't cry, nor did she storm over to confront them. With the steely composure of a general's daughter, she knew this wasn't the time to strike. She calmly sat at her desk and opened the supply depot expenditure report Hogan had just sent over for her signature. The chaotic numbers, the budget deficits clumsily hidden under line items for entertainment expenses and emergency repairs, were glaringly obvious to her trained eye. "So, you want to pave the way for her by turning me into an embezzler?" Eleanor whispered, a bitter smile gracing her refined but firm features. She recognized the shape of a devious plan. Hogan wanted to exploit her trust, getting her to sign fraudulent documents that he would later use to expel her from the unit. Eleanor flipped to the last page, where Hogan had cleverly embedded a clause about personal liability for any financial losses. If she signed this, she would be placing her own neck in the noose her husband had so carefully tied. Eleanor picked up a pen, twirling it in her fingers. The memory of a frigid winter night, of a shared pack of ramen noodles, flashed through her mind. She suddenly felt disgusted by the olive-drab uniform being so thoroughly dishonored by the man in the office across the way. At that same moment, in the S3 office, Hogan launched his first public attack. He grabbed a stack of monthly administrative expense reports and slammed them on the table in front of his aides, the sound echoing sharply. "What the hell is Captain Vance doing? Even a simple supply report is full of errors. Why did our paper budget increase by 5% this month? What kind of management lets government property just walk out the door?" Hogan's shouting reverberated down the hallway, intentionally loud enough for Eleanor and the entire S1 staff to hear. He was shaping the public narrative, painting himself as an impartial leader, a man who upheld military justice so strictly he would even discipline his own wife for incompetence. Eleanor took a deep breath. From a locked drawer, she pulled out a silver flash drive, something she had been preparing for over a month. She began copying the real-time data from the supply inventory system on which she had secretly installed tracking software. Every keystroke, every mouse click made by Hogan or Tiffany to alter the data was being recorded in detail. "You want to play the righteous crusader, Derek? I'll let you play your part to the very end," Eleanor murmured. She didn't fight back. She chose the patience of a calm sea before a tsunami. She knew Hogan was frantically preparing for the disciplinary board meeting next week, where he planned to publicly fire his wife and install his mistress. Her fingers tapped a rhythm on the wooden desk. She remembered her father's words. Major General Harrison Vance had always taught her, "To defeat an arrogant man, you must first feed his arrogance to its absolute peak. When he believes he has reached the summit, that is when he is most likely to fall." Eleanor shut down her computer. Her eyes no longer held a trace of submission. They burned with a cold, sharp fire. The play was set, but who was the director and who was the actor? Only the final act would tell. She walked out of her office, facing the pitying and concerned looks of her colleagues after Hogan's staged outburst. Eleanor simply offered a faint, enigmatic smile. The smile was so unsettling that Tiffany, who was sashaying past at that moment, suddenly felt a chill run down her spine. Hogan's plan for a romantic field exercise at a luxury resort with Tiffany was already locked into his schedule. He had no idea that his every move was being monitored by the wife he dismissed as a quiet administrative drone. The storm was gathering, and its eye was centered on the dancing numbers stored inside that silver flash drive. Eleanor returned to her office, a small room at the end of the administrative wing hallway, where the scent of old paper and fresh Earl Grey tea always lingered. She closed the door, the soft click of the lock sounding like a definitive separation from the schemes and chaos brewing at the other end of the building. She sat down and placed the depot expenditure report from Hogan on her desk. Her long, slender fingers glided over the crisp paper. She didn't open it immediately, needing a moment for her heart rate to steady. In the military, they teach you that before any battle, the side that keeps the coolest head has already won half the war. Eleanor was in such a battle, a fight to protect the honor of a soldier and the dignity of a woman. She pulled the silver flash drive from her wallet. It rested in her palm, small and cold, yet it held the weight to collapse the entire career Derek Hogan had built on a foundation of lies. She plugged it into her computer. A soft chime sounded as folders appeared, each named with a dry, coded label, but containing a treasure trove of evidence documenting his corruption. For 10 years, Hogan had seen Eleanor as a slow, meticulous admin drone, lost in a world of meaningless numbers. He never realized that this very precision had forged a sharp, analytical mind. She began to cross-reference the report on her desk with the real-time data she had secretly collected. Just as she suspected, in the section detailing consumable supplies for the last training exercise, Hogan had skillfully inflated the quotas for fuel and spare parts. The figures were broken down and embedded in various incidental cost categories, making them seem perfectly reasonable to a casual observer. But to Eleanor, who knew every technical standard of the unit by heart, these numbers screamed fraud. The total discrepancy amounted to over $100,000, enough to send any officer to a court-martial. "Oh, Derek," Eleanor whispered, her voice catching. It wasn't the money that hurt her. It was the fact that her husband was so certain she would be foolish enough to sign it. He planned to use her signature as a shield for his crimes, so that when the scandal eventually broke, he could be the one to painfully discipline his wife to secure the S3 position he coveted. One stone, two birds, money for his mistress and a perfectly legal way to dispose of his outdated wife. Eleanor looked out the window. On the parade ground below, young soldiers trained enthusiastically under the harsh sun, their green uniforms faded with sweat, their faces tanned by the wind, but their eyes shining with a pure, idealistic belief. A pang of sorrow hit her. Hogan had once been like them, a young officer full of passion, who had sworn under the flag to protect every inch of land, every dollar of the unit's assets. But worldly ambition had eroded his character so quickly she hadn't even noticed. Eleanor began working on her computer. She didn't correct Hogan's report. She preserved it as evidence of his deliberate wrongdoing. Instead, she created a secret countersigned report extracting data from the original invoices she had secretly photocopied from the logistics office before Hogan could have the evidence shredded. Every click of her mouse was decisive and firm. Just then, her phone buzzed with a notification. It was a screenshot from a fake social media account she used to monitor Tiffany. The post showed off a brand new designer handbag with a suggestive caption, "Thanks for the gift from my man. He said it was the fruit of a major project. Love you." Eleanor looked at the purse, then at the deficit on her screen. The matching values made her laugh, a humorless, empty sound. Hogan was using the sweat and hard work of his soldiers, using his own wife's future, to buy the fawning smiles of a young woman. The sheer cheapness of it all disgusted her more than the pain of betrayal. She removed the flash drive, locked the report in her desk, and stood up, straightening her uniform. She had to leave. There was one person she needed to see, the one person who could give her the clearest perspective, the very person she had deliberately avoided for years to prove she could stand on her own 2 feet. Eleanor drove her old sedan off the base. The wind from the surrounding fields carried the scent of pine, soothing the simmering heat in her mind. She pulled up to a stately brick house nestled deep within the senior officers' quarters. There was no ostentatious display of wealth here, only a quiet dignity and serenity under the shade of ancient oak trees. Major General Harrison Vance was in his garden, meticulously pruning his rose bushes. Hearing footsteps, he didn't turn around. His deep voice simply rumbled, "So, you finally decided to come home." Captain Eleanor Vance instinctively snapped to attention and saluted, then let her shoulders slump. "Hello, Dad," she said softly. General Vance put down his shears and turned to face his daughter. The eyes of a man who had seen the horrors of war now held only warmth for his only child. He poured a cup of iced tea and pushed it toward her. "You look pale. I've heard whispers about what's happening at the brigade. That Hogan boy is pushing things too far, isn't he?" Eleanor lowered her head, her hand tightening around the cool glass. "You know everything already. I may be retired, but my eyes and ears in this man's army aren't blind yet," he said. "Hogan has talent, but his soul has been corrupted by materialism. He's in too much of a hurry to climb into a seat he doesn't have the character to fill." The general took a sip of tea, his voice calm but powerful. "What's your plan? Do you want me to make a phone call?" Eleanor looked up at her father, her eyes blazing with determination. "No, Dad, I want to end this myself. I didn't hide my identity for 10 years just to run back under your shadow now. I didn't come here to be rescued. I came here for your confirmation. If I follow the uniform code of military justice, if I expose a corrupt officer, will you blame me for the sake of your son-in-law?" General Vance looked deep into his daughter's eyes and saw a reflection of himself 30 years ago, unyielding, righteous, and uncompromising in the face of wrong. A rare smile touched his lips. "In this army, there are only fellow soldiers and the regulations, not sons-in-law or daughters. If he has betrayed this uniform, he will pay the price. You do what you believe is right for the honor of an officer. I will only step in if you need absolute justice." Eleanor took a deep breath. Her father's words felt like a surge of strength coursing through her veins. She stood, the afternoon sun glinting off the silver bars of her captain's rank, making them shine with pride. "Thank you, Dad. Next week, the brigade is holding a routine disciplinary hearing. Hogan plans to use it to have me publicly discharged. I'd like to invite you to attend, as a former command leader visiting your old stomping grounds. I'll be there, General Vance nodded. But remember, make sure your sword is sharp and your shield is strong. Ambitious men become reckless when cornered. Eleanor left her father's house feeling strangely light. As she drove back to the base, the sun was setting. Passing the brigade HQ, she saw Hogan standing on the balcony, talking animatedly on his phone, laughing. He was probably promising Tiffany a glorious future after next week's hearing. Eleanor's hand went to her purse, where the silver flash drive lay dormant. It wasn't just data. It was the verdict she had prepared for this rotten marriage. She wouldn't scream, she wouldn't fight, she wouldn't beg. She would use the very methods the Army had taught her, neutralize the target with precision and absolute adherence to the rules. Back at her apartment, she found Hogan had returned. He was sitting at the coffee table, holding the expenditure report she had yet to sign. Seeing her, he scowled. "Where have you been? Why is this report still in your desk?" "Sign it, so I can submit it to the commander tomorrow. You drag your feet on everything. No wonder you've been stuck at the same rank for 10 years. Eleanor didn't respond to the insult. She calmly took the pen and flipped to the last page. She looked at Hogan, then at the empty signature line. "Are you sure all these numbers are accurate?" Major Hogan scoffed, his face a mask of condescension. "I've been an operations officer for years. You think I'd make a mistake on a few simple figures? Just sign it and stop asking questions. You should be thanking me for including you in this report to boost your performance review." Eleanor lowered the pen. A clean, decisive signature appeared on the paper. Hogan, overjoyed, snatched the folder, his eyes gleaming with triumph. He had no idea that her signature was not an act of submission, but the sounding of the death knell for all his delusional ambitions. After signing the doctored expenditure report, Eleanor felt a chill spread from her fingertips deep into her bones. To Hogan, that signature was a green light for his despicable plans. To her, it was the final chapter of a life defined by forbearance. She watched him gather the file with an unusual enthusiasm, his eyes sparkling with the thrill of a general who had just won a decisive battle on the field. "I'm heading out for a field exercise up north tomorrow morning. I'll probably be gone for 3 days," Hogan announced as he buckled his belt, his tone condescending. "You manage things here at home. And don't bother calling and nagging me about dinner. I've already handled everything at the brigade. For the disciplinary hearing on Friday, just be prepared to give a good explanation for your actions." Eleanor leaned against the doorframe, her gaze empty as she watched her husband. The northern training area. She knew very well that region consisted of nothing but barren red clay hills and temporary training shelters. But she also knew that not far from there was a luxury lakeside resort, the very one Tiffany had hinted about in her gossipy chats at the office. "I wish you a successful exercise," Eleanor replied softly, her voice so placid that even Hogan paused for a second in suspicion. But his arrogance quickly overshadowed his reason. He grabbed his bag and left, leaving behind the scent of cheap perfume mixed with the stench of deceit. That night, the base housing community was swallowed by an eerie silence. Eleanor sat in the dark, not turning on any lights. Moonlight streamed through the window blinds, painting long, fractured stripes on the floor. She took out her phone and played an audio file, a recording of Hogan and Tiffany's conversation from that morning, captured by a listening device she had installed. Their laughter, Hogan's promises to take Tiffany away for a change of scenery to compensate for her stressful work, sounded unbearably bitter. Suddenly, her phone screen lit up with a social media notification. For some time, Eleanor had been using a fake account to follow Tiffany Monroe. Tiffany was the kind of woman who thrived on public admiration, needing to flaunt her lavish lifestyle to affirm her status as a victor. And there it was, the picture. The photo showed a luxurious resort room with a large glass door overlooking a lake shimmering under the sunset. On a wooden table on the balcony sat 2 glasses of red wine and a bouquet of vibrant red roses. But what made Eleanor's breath catch was the reflection in the glass. Major Derek Hogan, the decorated operations officer, wearing nothing but a loosely tied bathrobe, was embracing Tiffany from behind. His face was radiant, his eyes filled with a devotion he had never shown her in 10 years. Tiffany's caption read, "Our own private training area, just golden sun and you. Thanks, Major, for this very special field exercise." Eleanor stared at the picture, feeling an invisible hand squeezing her chest. 10 years of her youth, 10 years of wading through his long deployments, 10 years of burying her loneliness to fulfill the duty of a soldier's wife. It all flashed before her eyes like a faded, flawed documentary. She once believed forgiveness could heal any wound, but she now saw that forgiving someone without a conscience was merely nurturing the seeds of evil. She placed a hand over her heart, which was beating in slow, heavy thuds. She remembered their early days of marriage, when Hogan was a broke young officer and they had to rent a damp, cramped apartment near the base. During rainy nights when the tin roof leaked, he would use a plastic sheet to shield her, whispering, "Ellie, once I get promoted, I'll make it all up to you. You're the only woman I'll ever worship." Those solemn vows now felt like a bucket of ice water thrown in her face. The honor of an officer, the oath sworn to the flag. Hogan had traded it all for a few moments of cheap pleasure. He hadn't just betrayed her. He was betraying the very uniform her father and thousands of other soldiers cherished with their lives. Eleanor didn't cry. Her tear ducts seemed to have run dry since the night she saw Hogan get out of Tiffany's car at the back gate of the base. She saved the picture to a secure folder in the cloud, alongside the evidence of embezzlement she had painstakingly gathered. This photo was the final straw. It burned away the last remnants of affection, leaving behind a cold, ruthless clarity. She realized that if she didn't stand up, if she didn't tear off Hogan's mask herself, not only would her own life be ruined, but the honor of Major General Harrison Vance's family would be stained by such a despicable son-in-law. "That's enough, Derek," Eleanor whispered into the thick darkness. She stood up, walked to her desk, and opened a drawer to retrieve a large envelope. Inside were photocopies of fuel and supply invoices and transcribed audio recordings. She clipped a freshly printed copy of the resort photo to the very first page. It was a perfect contrast, the image of a depraved officer indulging in pleasure above, and the numbers detailing the public funds he had plundered to pay for it below. Eleanor felt a new strength flow through her. She was no longer the sorrowful wife waiting for her husband to come home for dinner. She was Captain Eleanor Vance, an administrative officer of the United States Army. She had been trained to analyze, to be patient, and to neutralize threats. And right now, Major Derek Hogan was the target she had to deal with to protect what was right. The next morning, Eleanor woke earlier than usual. She looked at herself in the mirror. The fine lines at the corners of her eyes were artifacts of a decade of patience, but her eyes now shone with a sharp, cold light. She applied light makeup and a coat of deep red lipstick, the color of determination, of a power she had long concealed behind a meek facade. She put on her crisp dress uniform, smoothing every crease. As she pinned the silver bars of a captain to her shoulders, she felt a profound sense of solemnity. She wasn't just wearing it for herself. She was wearing it to prove that a soldier's honor doesn't lie in the rank of a major or the title of Deputy S3, but in the integrity of their heart. As soon as she arrived at the brigade, Eleanor sensed a different atmosphere. Tiffany had called in sick, but the whispers in the command building were incessant. People were talking about Major Hogan being away for a field exercise, yet someone had seen his car parked at the lakeside resort. The glances directed at Eleanor were a mixture of pity and the subtle mockery of spectators watching a drama unfold. Eleanor ignored it all. She went straight to the records office and requested to review the original files of last year's financial reconciliations. She worked with a calm, methodical efficiency that even the warrant officer in charge found intimidating. All the chess pieces were now in place. Friday's disciplinary hearing would be a battlefield, and she was ready to be its most brilliant commander. Around 10 a.m., her phone vibrated. It was a text from her father, Major General Harrison Vance. "Daughter, are you ready? I've received an invitation from the brigade commander to visit my old unit. I'll be there Friday morning." Eleanor smiled, a rare but powerful smile. Her father's support wasn't the shield of power, it was the validation of justice. She knew Hogan was at that idyllic lake, laughing over glasses of wine and sweet nothings, completely unaware that the ground beneath his feet was about to crumble. She looked at the resort photo one last time, then calmly used a lighter to burn it in a ceramic ashtray. The small blue flame consumed Hogan's smug face, leaving only a pile of gray ash. "Game over," Captain Vance whispered, her lips curling into a smirk. Her gaze, as cold as tempered steel, was fixed on the northern horizon, where the real storm was brewing. The afternoon sun in the Carolina sandhills can make a person drowsy, but not Derek Hogan. He returned from his sweet field exercise at the lakeside resort with the mindset of a conqueror about to claim his kingdom. His face was artfully tanned, the result of spending a few hours deliberately standing outside to create the facade of an officer roughing it in the field. Walking into the apartment, Hogan tossed his tactical backpack onto the floor. His eyes swept across the room and landed on Eleanor, who was sitting quietly at her desk. He had no idea that while he was basking in Tiffany's honeyed words, Eleanor had been finalizing a battle plan with millimeter precision. "That exercise was exhausting," Hogan said, pulling off his sweat-drenched uniform shirt, "but the results were excellent. The brigade commander just hinted that I'll be taking over as the S3 next month. However, there's a small paperwork issue I need you to handle." Eleanor looked up, her face a blank canvas, as calm as a windless lake. She knew the performance was about to begin. Hogan needed a scapegoat to cover the budget deficits he had funneled into his lavish lifestyle and his mistress's new condo. "What do you need me to do?" Eleanor asked, her voice so meek that Hogan himself felt completely in control of the situation. Hogan pulled a thick stack of documents from his briefcase and slammed it on the desk. "These are personal asset declarations and capital commitment forms for the upcoming logistics equipment upgrade project. You know, the Army is tightening up on inventory control. For me to get the S3 job, we need a clean financial profile. I've listed this apartment, the car, and some savings bonds as collateral for the unit. Just sign here as my wife. It's just an administrative formality to show the higher-ups that our family has financial stability and is fully supportive." He pushed a fountain pen toward Eleanor, his eyes glued to her hand, his urgency palpable in his quickened breath. He was confident that Eleanor, the wife who had always trusted him blindly and was clueless about complex legal documents, would sign without a second thought. In reality, hidden within that stack of papers were falsified receipts and promissory notes designed to shift all blame for the financial discrepancies onto her if things went south. Eleanor picked up the file and leisurely flipped through the pages. She squinted, feigning difficulty with the dry, legalistic text. In her mind, the layout of the chessboard was crystal clear. "Derek, there are so many pages. I don't understand any of this," Eleanor said, hesitantly placing the file down. "Maybe I should take it to my dad's old lawyer tomorrow morning, just to be safe. Dad always said to be careful with legal documents." The mention of her father made Hogan flinch. His face paled, and he quickly waved his hands, his voice becoming pleading, tinged with irritation. "No, no, why bring lawyers into this? It's an internal unit matter. Taking it outside will only complicate things. Don't you trust me? I'm your husband. Would I ever trick you? Everything I do, enduring these tough exercises, networking, isn't it all for the good of this family? To give us a better life?" Hogan switched to an emotional appeal, his hand resting on her shoulder, a gesture that made her stomach turn. He had no idea that his frantic attempt to cover his tracks had completely exposed his true intentions. Eleanor sighed, her face a mask of weary resignation. "All right, I trust you. But I've been sitting here for a while and I'm thirsty. Could you get me a glass of cold orange juice from the kitchen? I'll sign everything as soon as I've had a drink." Hogan was ecstatic. Without a hint of suspicion, he immediately stood up. Of course. Just wait a minute, my dear. I'll get it for you right now." The moment Hogan's back disappeared through the kitchen doorway, the atmosphere in the room solidified. Eleanor moved with the speed and precision of a special forces operator. From a hidden compartment she had taped under the desk earlier that day, she pulled out another stack of documents, identical in appearance down to the color of the folder and the placement of the staples. She swiftly swapped the contents of the two files. Hogan's damning papers were tucked securely into her purse, while the file she now placed on the desk was a masterpiece of strategic counterattack. In this new document, Eleanor had signed nothing that admitted fault. Instead, she had drafted a sophisticated personal loan agreement. The document stated that the signatory, Derek Hogan, acknowledged borrowing a substantial sum of money from Eleanor Vance, the exact total of the embezzled funds, and the value of assets her family had gifted her personally. Furthermore, a clause stipulated that if the loan was not repaid within 24 hours of him being disciplined, Hogan would have to surrender all rights to their shared apartment, the car, and any joint savings to compensate for the damage to his wife's honor. The clinking of a spoon against glass came from the kitchen. Eleanor flipped to the last page, the only page where Hogan expected her signature, but in reality, it was the page where she required his acknowledgement as the one making the commitment. Hogan returned, holding a glass of orange juice, a triumphant smile on his face. "Here you go, honey." Eleanor took the glass, took a sip, then picked up the pen. She signed a firm, clean line in the witness section and pushed a different page toward Hogan. "I've signed. But just to reassure me that you won't neglect our family when you get your promotion, could you sign this commitment letter too? It just says you promise to love and cherish our family and use our assets for the right purposes. It's just for my peace of mind." Hogan chuckled heartily, internally mocking his wife for being so sentimental and naive. He didn't even bother reading the content, merely glancing at the title, Family Commitment Letter, which Eleanor had cleverly placed at the top of the page. He grabbed the pen and signed his name with a bold flourish in the Commitment By section. The signature of Major Derek Hogan was confident and sweeping, a clear display of the overconfidence of a man who believed he had just conquered an empire. He didn't know that with that stroke of ink, he had just signed the death warrant for his military career and his illusion of wealth. He had just signed himself into servitude, willingly surrendering everything he had left to the wife he was plotting to discard. "They're all done," Hogan said cheerfully, gathering the file and hugging it to his chest like a hoard of gold. He leaned in to kiss Eleanor on the cheek, but she deftly avoided him by standing up to clear the glass. "You should put that away somewhere safe. You wouldn't want to lose such important papers," Eleanor said, her voice as cold as ice. But Hogan, drunk on his victory, failed to notice. "Don't worry," he said. "This is our future." Hogan scurried to his office to hide his prize. Eleanor remained in the living room, her long shadow stretching across the floor under the moonlight. She vigorously wiped the back of her hand where his shirt had accidentally brushed against her, a wave of revulsion washing over her. She went to the balcony and looked down at the barracks in the distance. Hogan thought he had taken everything from her. In reality, he had just signed his own conviction. Tomorrow, at the very disciplinary hearing he had orchestrated to humiliate her, he would learn the true price of underestimation. He had underestimated a wife, underestimated an administrative soldier, and he had forgotten that in the army, the victor isn't the one with the higher rank, but the one who maintains discipline and clarity to the very end. Eleanor opened her phone and sent a short text to her father's aide. "The fish has taken the bait. Everything is ready for the hearing." That night, Hogan slept soundly, dreaming of his promotion and passionate nights with Tiffany. As for Eleanor, she stayed awake, meticulously polishing her officer's dress shoes until her determined face was clearly reflected in the gleaming black leather. She was preparing for a very special ceremony, one where honor would be restored to its rightful owner, and the filth would be returned to the mud from which it came. The atmosphere at the brigade in the days leading up to the disciplinary hearing was thick and oppressive, like the air on the plains before a thunderstorm. The news that Captain Eleanor Vance, Major Hogan's wife, was facing a board of inquiry for serious financial misconduct spread faster than a general quarters alarm. In this unit, where honor was paramount, the incident was more than just a dry administrative matter. It was a knife in the heart of collective trust. The whispers started behind Eleanor's back. The way people looked at her changed by the hour. Some felt pity for the quiet, diligent administrative officer. Many others sneered, assuming she had abused her position as the boss's wife and was now getting what she deserved. Eleanor continued to arrive at work on time, her expression so calm it disappointed those looking for drama. She wore her uniform impeccably, her posture erect as she walked down the windswept corridor. Passing the mailroom, she heard Tiffany Monroe's giggles. Tiffany stood in the center of a circle of junior enlisted personnel, holding a new file, her voice sharp with insinuation. "Honestly, whatever you do, you have to protect the honor of the uniform." You don't want to wait until they're stripping your rank to feel regret. This is the army, not a flea market where you can just make up numbers and skim off the top. Eleanor stopped and turned to look directly into Tiffany's eyes. Her gaze wasn't angry or resentful. It was deep and cold like an old well. Tiffany faltered, the smile freezing on her face for a moment before she recovered her arrogant demeanor, lifting her chin in defiance. Eleanor said nothing, only offering a faint smile before walking on. She understood that those who boast of victory too early are often the ones who fall the hardest when the curtain of truth is finally raised. Meanwhile, in the Deputy S3's office, Derek Hogan was lost in his own one-man play. He called various department heads, his voice filled with tragic reluctance. "Believe me, this is tearing me apart, but the UCMJ makes no exceptions for family. Even though it's my own wife, I can't cover up wrongdoing. This was a critical mission for the brigade. Losing even $1 is a crime against the taxpayer. I have prepared a formal request for strict disciplinary action. I expect all of you to follow protocol and not give me any special consideration." Hogan's performance was so convincing that even colleagues who disliked his arrogance began to believe he was a paragon of integrity, willing to sacrifice personal feelings for the greater good. He was certain that with public opinion on his side and the document of confession he had tricked Eleanor into signing, she would have no way out. She would have to accept a quiet discharge to save what little face she had left, and then he would be free to ascend to the S3 position with his young lover. On Thursday afternoon, the day before the hearing, Eleanor was summoned to the main auditorium for a procedural briefing. Hogan was there, presiding over the meeting. When he saw his wife, his expression was as cold as if he were looking at a condemned prisoner. He offered no greeting, merely nodding his head toward the section reserved for individuals under review. Eleanor looked at her husband, a wave of profound disgust rising within her. This man, who 10 years ago had sworn to protect her, was now using every ounce of his petty power to suffocate her. She lightly touched the breast pocket of her uniform, where the silver flash drive lay dormant. It was a silent rebellion, yet it held enough power to topple an entire empire of lies. After work, Eleanor didn't go straight home. She drove to the outskirts of the base, toward the military cemetery, where rows of white headstones stood silent under the crimson sunset. She stood before the grave of one of her father's old comrades, her heart heavy with thought. The soldiers buried here had died for honor, for the integrity of the uniform. And Hogan, he was trampling on those very values for a condo for his mistress and a few hollow, extravagant parties. "Sir, tomorrow I'm going to do something many might call cruel," she whispered, the evening breeze rustling her uniform. "But I believe that if evil isn't exposed, it becomes a cancer that destroys an entire organization. I have to preserve the true meaning of this uniform, even if the price is the destruction of a home that was already rotten from the inside." Her phone vibrated. A text from Major General Harrison Vance. "Daughter, are you prepared? I will arrive early tomorrow. I won't sit in the front row. I want to watch how this traitor directs his own final act. Stand firm. Your honor is yours to command. No one can take it from you." Eleanor took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of dry grass and earth. Her father's support was not just an emotional anchor, it was a confirmation that she was on the right path. She knew Hogan would deliver the final blow tomorrow, but he had no idea that the hilt of the knife was actually in the hands of the woman he despised most. That night, Hogan came home very late. He ignored his wife, went straight into his study, and locked the door. Eleanor could hear him laughing on the phone, likely celebrating his impending victory with Tiffany. He believed tomorrow would be his coronation, where he would not only remove the obstacle at home, but also score points as an iron-willed, incorruptible leader in front of the entire brigade. Eleanor sat in the living room, polishing her dress shoes, until her determined face was reflected in the gleaming leather. She did not sleep, nor did she feel anxious. In her mind, the details of tomorrow's hearing unfolded like a battle plan. She had prepared everything, from the audio files and resort photos to the countersigned reports she had secretly compiled from original drafts. The night in the housing community grew strangely quiet, broken only by the sound of the wind whistling through the window frames, like a lament for trampled values. But Eleanor knew that in just a few hours, this silence would be shattered by the blinding light of truth. As dawn broke, Eleanor rose and put on her finest dress uniform. She smoothed every crease, reverently pinning on her good conduct medal. She looked in the mirror at the woman staring back, a sharp, resilient, and proud army captain. Hogan emerged from his room. Seeing his wife so impeccably dressed, he sneered. "Why the formal attire? Today's hearing isn't a fashion show. You should be preparing your confession. If you're lucky, the commander might show some leniency out of respect for me and give you an honorable discharge instead of a court-martial. Don't let it get to the point where they have to rip the rank off your shoulders in front of everyone. It's humiliating." Eleanor looked him straight in the eye. Her gaze was so intense that Hogan instinctively took a step back. "I don't need a confession, Major. All I need is the truth. And the truth is often very painful for those who live in a fantasy." Hogan grunted, grabbed his briefcase, and walked out ahead of her. He was completely unaware that behind him, Eleanor was walking with the bearing of a commander entering the battlefield. Outside, platoons of soldiers were in the middle of their morning physical training. Their rhythmic chants echoed across the base, urging Eleanor forward. Hogan sped off in his black sedan, the exhaust fumes dissipating into the morning mist. Eleanor walked along the paved road toward the auditorium, each step firm and resolute. At the main gate, a black government car with official plates began to roll toward the building. In the back seat, Major General Harrison Vance looked toward the auditorium, his eyes as deep as an ocean before a great storm. The brigade auditorium that morning had a cold, solemn air. Rows of polished wooden chairs were neatly arranged. On the stage, a dark blue curtain with a golden eagle and the face of a stoic historical figure seemed to look down with silent judgment. The ceiling fans whirred, failing to stir the thick, oppressive atmosphere that hung over the nearly 50 officers present. At precisely 0800 hours, Derek Hogan entered. He wore his dress blue uniform, the silver oak leaf of a major gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He walked to the front row, his expression grave, occasionally letting out a heavy sigh as he tapped a thick file against his leg. It was the posture of a leader bearing the painful weight of sacrificing personal ties for the greater good. His colleagues' gazes followed him, some admiring his integrity, others anticipating the drama of a lion devouring its own. Eleanor entered a few minutes later. She didn't take a seat in the section reserved for the command staff, though her rank entitled her to. She quietly walked to the side row, the area designated for those under disciplinary review. She sat down, her back straight, her hands resting lightly in her lap. Her uniform was perfect, her face unadorned by makeup, yet she radiated a calm, dignified presence. She didn't look at Hogan or the whispering crowd behind her. Her eyes were fixed on an unseen point on the stage, as if she existed in another world, untouched by their petty schemes. In a corner at the back of the auditorium, the indistinct figure of a man with silver hair sat quietly behind a few junior officers. It was Major General Harrison Vance. He sat without ceremony, his deep-set eyes focused first on his daughter, then shifting to the son-in-law who was playing the part of a righteous judge, a flicker of pity in his gaze. Hogan, lost in his own imagined glory, didn't even notice the presence of the legendary general he had long admired. The hearing began. The brigade commander, a stern man with a square jaw, gave the opening remarks. He spoke of the importance of discipline, of allowing no one to tarnish the Army's honor. Then, he gestured to Hogan. "I now invite Major Derek Hogan, Deputy S3, to present the findings of the investigative committee regarding the misconduct of Captain Vance." Hogan stood. He paused for dramatic effect, looking toward Eleanor with an expression of profound sorrow, a truly masterful performance. He cleared his throat, his voice booming and powerful, yet laced with a subtle, calculated falsehood. "Commanding officer, fellow leaders, I stand before you today with a heavy heart. The officer we are here to review is not just a captain in this brigade, but also the woman who has been my wife for many years. But the Uniform Code of Military Justice makes no exceptions for family. As soldiers, we cannot allow personal feelings to excuse actions that undermine the integrity of this unit and this army." Hogan opened his file, his voice turning sharp as he listed the fabricated charges against Eleanor. He pointed to the projector screen, which displayed the falsified supply reports bearing her signature. During a surprise inspection of the supply depot, we discovered that Captain Vance used her position to inflate supply quotas during the last field exercise. The total deficit is a significant sum. Moreover, Hogan paused, his voice cracking as if suppressing great pain. When confronted, Captain Vance attempted to create fraudulent counter-documents to conceal her actions. All the evidence, bearing her own signature, is right here. Hogan held up the paper with Eleanor's signature for the entire room to see. Tiffany, sitting in the audience, smirked, her eyes gleaming with triumph. A murmur rippled through the crowd. "I can't believe it." "The Major's wife?" "Major Hogan is a true professional." Hogan looked at Eleanor, his heart swelling with smug satisfaction. He saw her sitting motionless, her head slightly bowed. He thought she was afraid, ashamed. He delivered the final, decisive blow. "As her direct supervisor and as her husband, I take responsibility for my failure to provide proper guidance. I recommend that this board strip Captain Vance of her commission and immediately process her for administrative separation to serve as an example. Captain Vance will bear full legal responsibility for the missing funds." A gavel struck the podium with a sharp crack, a sound that seemed to seal Eleanor's fate. The auditorium fell silent. Hogan sat down, dabbing his forehead with a handkerchief, looking utterly exhausted by his righteous duty. The commander turned to Eleanor, his voice low. "Captain Vance, do you have anything to say in your defense?" Only then did Eleanor slowly rise. She moved without haste, adjusting her uniform jacket, straightening the insignia on her collar, and then walked to the front lectern. All eyes were on her, a mixture of curiosity, contempt, and pity. But when Eleanor lifted her head, a collective shiver went through the room. Her eyes were devoid of tears, empty of weakness. They were bright, calm, and strangely authoritative. "Sir, members of the board," Eleanor began, her voice not as loud as Hogan's but clear and resonant, reaching every corner of the room. "I fully acknowledge that the budget deficits in the report presented by Major Hogan are real, and I confirm that the signature on that document is mine." Hogan smirked. "So, she's admitting it," he thought. But Eleanor continued, her voice suddenly as sharp as a newly honed blade. "However, there is one thing Major Hogan forgot to tell the board, and that is where these numbers truly originated, and who is the one who actually embezzled brigade funds to buy a condominium and jewelry for his mistress. Major Hogan speaks of the law making no exceptions for family. I would like to use those exact words to return the sentiment to him. Right here, right now." From her briefcase, Eleanor produced a silver flash drive. She walked to the technician's table, to the astonishment of everyone present. "Sir, for the sake of objectivity, I request permission to present some additional materials. This is not just my defense. It is an indictment of the corruption of a senior officer sitting in this very room." Hogan's hands began to tremble. He started to rise, to object, but the commander's stern glare froze him in his seat. The large screen flickered to life. What appeared was not a spreadsheet or an invoice, but crystal-clear footage from a hidden camera. It showed Hogan and Tiffany altering documents in his office late at night. Audio recordings of their conversations plotting to frame Eleanor, discussing his promotion played over the speakers. The auditorium was stunned into silence. Tiffany's face went white. She tried to slip out the door, but two military policemen, acting on a subtle signal from the commander, blocked her path. Eleanor stood beside the screen, the projector's light casting her face in a cold, steely glow. She looked directly at Hogan, who now sat slumped in his chair like a lifeless puppet. "You wanted to strip me of my rank to make way for your lover. You used the honor of an officer as a stepping stone for your filthy greed. Derek Hogan, you were wrong. In this army, you might be able to fool a trusting wife, but you can never fool the integrity of a true soldier." From the back of the room, Major General Harrison Vance slowly stood and began to walk toward the front. His sudden, authoritative presence seemed to suck all the air out of the room, creating an explosive pressure. The brigade auditorium fell into a silence so profound it was terrifying. The speakers continued to broadcast the damning audio of Hogan and Tiffany's plotting, the sound of their treachery echoing off the walls, filling the ears of every officer present with a truth so ugly it was hard to breathe. Derek Hogan was frozen in his plush front-row seat. His once commanding, ruddy face was now ashen, the color of a corpse. Sweat poured down his face, soaking the collar of his uniform and making the silver oak leaf on his shoulder look heavy and absurdly ironic. Just as the tension reached its breaking point, a figure rose from the back of the room. He was a tall man who, despite his age, carried himself with the straight-backed posture of a great pine tree weathering a storm. He wore simple civilian clothes, a tan shirt, and dark slacks, but the aura emanating from his sharp eyes and dignified bearing made everyone who met his gaze feel an involuntary urge to snap to attention. He walked slowly toward the stage, the sound of his hard-soled shoes echoing a steady, authoritative rhythm on the wooden floor. As he approached the front row, the brigade commander shot to his feet, his face a mixture of shock and profound respect. He hastily stepped away from the podium and executed a perfect, crisp salute. "Sir, we were not aware you were visiting the brigade, Major General. My apologies for the oversight." A wave of astonished murmurs swept through the room. Younger officers looked at each other in confusion, while the veterans began whispering frantically. "Major General Harrison Vance? The living legend of this command? What is he doing here?" Hearing that name, Derek Hogan's knees gave out. He nearly collapsed from his chair. Major General Harrison Vance. A horrifying realization shot through him. He remembered Eleanor saying her father was a gardener back home. He remembered the faded black-and-white photograph he had always dismissed. The home he had imagined as a poor rural farmhouse was actually the exclusive senior officers' housing district, and the gardener was the titan whom everyone in the command revered. Major General Vance gave a slight gesture for the commander to be at ease, then turned his gaze on Hogan. His eyes held no fiery anger, only a cold, quiet depth like a frozen lake in winter. The silence of a general who had survived countless battles was more terrifying than any reprimand. It stripped away all of Hogan's pretenses, making him feel like a pathetic insect under the microscope of justice. The general walked over to Eleanor, who stood silently by the projector. He placed a rough, calloused hand, a hand shaped by years of holding weapons, gently on his daughter's shoulder. Only then did his expression soften, filled with a father's quiet pride and immeasurable sorrow. "Eleanor, you did exactly as I taught you. A soldier's honor is not measured by rank, but by their integrity in the face of evil. For 10 years, you hid who you were to forge your own path. I never blamed you. But I will not stand by and watch a parasite like this trample all over you." At that moment, Hogan completely broke. He scrambled from his chair and fell to his knees on the floor before the general and Eleanor. Cowardly tears streamed down his face, mingling with the sweat. He was no longer a proud operations officer. He was just a vile man grasping at the last straws of a non-existent relationship. "General, sir, I was wrong. Dad, please forgive me this one time. She seduced me. I wasn't thinking straight. Please, for the sake of my 10 years of service, for my sake as your son-in-law, don't let them take my commission." Eleanor looked down at the man groveling at her feet. She felt no satisfaction, only infinite disgust. This man had never truly loved her, nor had he ever respected the uniform. Even now, he was blaming others, shirking his responsibility. A soldier who cannot admit his own faults is not worthy of wearing the uniform for another second. "You are not worthy of calling my father Dad," Eleanor said, her voice like ice, "and you are not worthy of wearing that uniform. You claim you served this brigade for 10 years? No. You used this brigade as a tool for personal gain and to satisfy your lust. Your honor was sold the moment you stole money meant for medics on the front lines to buy jewelry for your mistress." General Vance tapped his wooden cane on the floor. The sharp sound made Hogan jump and fall silent. "Mr. Hogan, did you think I came here to use my influence to protect you? You are mistaken. I came here to witness the downfall of a traitor." He turned to the brigade commander, his voice hardening into a battlefield command. "Commander, as the one holding evidence of embezzlement, slander, and gross violation of military conduct by Major Hogan, I demand that this unit immediately initiate court-martial proceedings. There will be no cover-ups, no special considerations for sons-in-law or anyone else." Tiffany, held by the MPs in the corner, began to scream. "It wasn't me, it was all him. He forced me. He promised me a house, money, that's why I helped him. I'm just a civilian contractor, I'm innocent." The auditorium erupted once more. The ugly truth was laid bare as the two lovers turned on each other, a spectacle of blame and betrayal. The officers who had just been admiring Hogan now turned their backs on him, their eyes filled with utter contempt. Hogan buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. He understood now. The sky of power he had dreamed of had completely collapsed. He had slammed the door on his own future with his own greed and cowardice. Eleanor looked at her father, who stood as steadfast as a mountain. She took a deep breath, feeling a 10-year weight lift from her chest. This victory wasn't just for her, it was for the uniform she cherished and for the honor of her father, which had been tarnished by his despicable son-in-law. She walked to the podium and pulled a single, crisp sheet of paper from her briefcase. "Sir, these are the divorce papers, which I have already signed. From this moment on, Derek Hogan and I have no further legal or personal connection. I pledge my full cooperation with the investigation to account for every stolen dollar." The commander took the paper, nodding at Eleanor with deep respect. He picked up the gavel and brought it down hard. The sound was final, marking the end of a charade of false morality. "This hearing is adjourned. Military police will escort Mr. Hogan and Miss Monroe to the base stockade to await transfer to the Criminal Investigation Division. Seal the Deputy S3's office and confiscate all related materials immediately." Two MPs moved forward and decisively pulled Hogan to his feet. He was too broken to resist, stumbling like a man without a soul. As he was dragged past Eleanor, he moved his lips as if to beg one last time, but she had already turned away. Her eyes were fixed on the window, where the morning sun was flooding the room with light. When the auditorium doors closed behind the MPs escorting Hogan and Tiffany, a strange quiet descended. It wasn't the silence of fear before the power of a major general, but the stunned silence of people who had just witnessed a monument of false virtue crumble into filthy pieces. These soldiers, hardened by the sun and discipline of the field, were now reeling from the brutality of the schemes that had festered right under their noses. Eleanor remained standing, illuminated by the pale light of the projector. Her silhouette was cast long and lonely against the blue curtain, yet she appeared impossibly defiant. Major General Vance did not step onto the stage to assert any further authority. He remained in the front row, giving his daughter the space to complete her duty as an independent officer. He knew Eleanor needed to win this justice with her own strength, not the reflected glory of her father. The brigade commander cleared his throat, breaking the heavy silence. "Captain Vance, the board acknowledges the evidence you have provided. However, protocol requires you to clarify the matter of the signed expenditure report that Major Hogan submitted. Why did you sign a document you knew to be fraudulent?" Eleanor walked to the main table. From her briefcase, she produced the original file she had swapped in the kitchen that night. She placed it on the table, her slender but steady hands smoothing its pages. "Sir," she began, her voice clear and carrying through the hall, "my signature on the document Major Hogan presented is authentic, but the contents of that page were swapped by him from a different commitment letter I gave him while he was intoxicated. This is the original document I had him sign last night." She flipped to the final page. The room was shaken once more. Underneath Hogan's signature was not an officer's endorsement, but a personal debt agreement and a voluntary surrender of assets to cover the financial damages he himself had caused. "I understood that signing a fraudulent document to bait a trap was a risk," Eleanor continued, her gaze sweeping over her colleagues, who had long seen her as a faded presence in the admin office. "But if I hadn't signed, Major Hogan would never have fully revealed his intentions or the loopholes in the budget he has spent the last 3 years exploiting. I am prepared to accept any disciplinary action for my delay in reporting, but I will not allow the honor of this uniform to be sacrificed for one man's personal greed." At this, Major General Vance finally spoke, his voice deep and resonant. In warfare, there is a tactic of using bait to lure the enemy into a trap. Captain Vance used a traitor's own greed and his contempt for his wife to force him to sign his own indictment. That is not a procedural error. That is military strategy applied to a battle for integrity. He turned to the commander, his eyes sharp. I recommend that CID immediately freezes all transfers from this brigade's accounts to the shell companies registered under Tiffany Monroe's name. The $100,000 from the last training exercise is not the only missing sum. You will find it in the luxury condominium Derek Hogan just purchased. You will find it in the expensive car Tiffany Monroe is driving. All of it was stolen from the sweat, the labor, and the honor of this unit. On the projector screen, Eleanor began opening the final data folders. They contained bank statements she had professionally and discreetly extracted. The numbers did not lie. Kickbacks from supply contractors, slush funds for approving repair contracts, it was all there in black and white. In the audience, the officers who had once admired Hogan now stared at the floor in shame. Some trembled, realizing they had unwittingly aided him. Others were consumed with rage that their trust had been so horribly misplaced. The truth is like the morning sun. It will eventually burn through any fog. But that light can also be cruel, exposing the festering wounds people try to hide beneath perfectly pressed uniforms. Hogan had lost, not because he was unintelligent, but because he had fatally underestimated the woman who had stood by his side for a decade. He thought she was a slow-moving tortoise, content with her small pond, never realizing that she carried the instincts of a tiger and the blood of Major General Harrison Vance. "There is one more thing," Eleanor said, her voice dropping, filled with a profound sorrow. Among the embezzled funds was a significant allocation for first aid kits and medical supplies for our soldiers deployed to remote border outposts. Last winter, several of them suffered from exposure and illness because of these shortages. At the time, Major Hogan reported the issue was due to logistical difficulties. The truth is, the medicine money had been converted into a designer handbag for Miss Monroe. As an officer, I am ashamed on his behalf. The room erupted. Furious officers slammed their fists on the tables. This was no longer about an affair or simple greed. This was a crime against their brothers and sisters in arms, the very people who were shedding blood and sweat to defend the nation's borders. An older lieutenant colonel in the middle rows shot to his feet, his eyes red with fury. "That bastard! We share every last meal, every last pill out there, and he choked on his own words, overcome with rage. Eleanor looked at him, her own heart aching. She understood the pain of true soldiers. She had lived with that pain for 10 years, watching the man she once adored devolve into a monster of avarice, wearing the mask of an exemplary officer. All original evidence, including audio files, photos, and counter-documents, are hereby submitted to the board and to CID, Eleanor said, snapping to attention and delivering a flawless salute to the podium. "I am ready to accept any and all decisions of this command." The brigade commander stood, walked down from the stage, and stood before her. He looked into her eyes for a long moment, then let out a sigh of relief. "Captain Vance, on behalf of this brigade, I thank you for your persistence and your courage. Without your patience and strategy, how much longer would this cancer have been allowed to rot our unit? You are not at fault, Captain. You have performed your duty as a soldier exceptionally." Major General Vance came to stand beside his daughter. He didn't offer grand words about justice or power. He simply reached out his old, weathered hand, straightened the collar of her uniform, and adjusted the slightly crooked insignia on her chest. His eyes were now purely those of a father, grieving for the lonely, brutal battle his daughter had just won. "Let's go, Eleanor," he said softly, his voice just for her. "The truth is in the light now. The rest is for military justice." Eleanor nodded. She took one last look at the auditorium. Her colleagues were standing, looking at her with an entirely new expression, not pity, not scorn, but profound respect. She walked out beside her father, the sound of their shoes firm and clear on the wooden floor, as if each step was a rung on a ladder leading out of the abyss of a 10-year lie. As they exited the auditorium, a breeze from the training grounds blew in, carrying the rich scent of earth and dry grass. Eleanor took a deep, cleansing breath. The air out here, however dusty, was infinitely cleaner than the suffocating atmosphere of that cold apartment. In the parking lot, 2 special vehicles from the Army's Criminal Investigation Division were waiting. Hogan and Tiffany were being led out. When Hogan saw the general and Eleanor emerge, he suddenly began to struggle, screaming like a madman. "Ellie, save me! I was framed! Dad, please don't let them take me! I'm your son-in-law!" His desperate cries tore through the morning calm, but no one turned back. Eleanor got into her father's car. Through the window, she watched Hogan's figure shrink, growing smaller and smaller until he disappeared around a bend. From this moment on, she knew Derek Hogan would be nothing more than a dark footnote in a cold case file. The sharp beeps of the CID transport vehicle backing up to the military courthouse sounded as cold and methodical as a final countdown. Derek Hogan stepped out, his hands locked in a pair of steel cuffs. The major's uniform he had once worn with such pride, the one he had used to deceive the world and crush his wife, was now wrinkled and pathetic. The rank had been torn from his shoulders, leaving 2 faded patches of fabric like scars of his disgrace. The court-martial was closed to the public, but its solemnity was enough to suffocate anyone who entered. Eleanor sat in the section reserved for witnesses and victims. She wore a simple gray dress, her expression as tranquil as a still lake. Beside her, Major General Vance sat with his hands resting on his wooden cane, his gaze fixed on the defendant's box where his former son-in-law stood, slumped in defeat. I have seen many men fall from grace, but Hogan's plight was a stark lesson in the nature of corruption. Gone was the commanding presence of the operations officer, gone were the lectures on military justice. Before the panel of judges, Hogan trembled, his pale lips stammering out meaningless excuses. "Your Honors, the defendant admits to some managerial oversights, but I was misled. I have 10 years of dedicated service. 10 years of service or 10 years of plunder?" The lead judge, a colonel with a voice like gravel, cut in. "The evidence provided by Captain Vance shows that you began creating phantom projects to skim from supply contracts in your 2nd year of command. The theft of medical funds for deployed soldiers was not an oversight. It was a deliberate transfer of funds to your personal accounts through Miss Monroe. Are you aware, Mr. Hogan, that last winter, soldiers were hospitalized in critical condition because the basic medical supplies you stole were not available?" The courtroom fell silent. Eleanor clenched her hands beneath the table. The memories of Hogan bringing home expensive gifts, of lavish parties that had always felt wrong, now tasted like acid. Behind her husband's triumphant smiles lay the suffering of his comrades on the front lines. This betrayal hurt more than his infidelity. It was a betrayal of the uniform itself, of the ideals her father had devoted his entire life to. When it was Tiffany's turn, she was a shadow of her former seductive self. Her hair was a mess, her face, stripped of makeup, was pale and ordinary. She sobbed, blaming everything on Hogan. It was all him. He told me his wife was just a stupid country girl who wouldn't notice a thing. He promised me a future, so I helped him forge the documents. I'm just a contractor. I had to follow orders. The spectacle of 2 people who had once whispered promises now tearing each other apart was both disgusting and pathetic. It was the inevitable end for a relationship built on greed and lust. When the spotlight of power is extinguished, the selfish, cowardly nature of the players is revealed in its raw, ugly form. Eleanor rose to speak. Her voice was quiet but carried throughout the room. "Your Honors, I am not here to reclaim money. I have provided the investigators with all necessary evidence to seize any assets, Mr. Hogan acquired through illicit means and return them to the Army. The only thing I wish to reclaim is honor. Honor for the true soldiers who were tarnished by his corruption, and honor for myself, a wife who spent 10 years trusting a man who had no soul." She turned to look at Hogan, her eyes holding not hatred, but a deep, profound pity. "You called me plain, said I was only fit for a desk job. You were right. I was content to be a shadow so that you could shine. But you forgot that before I was your wife, I was the daughter of Major General Harrison Vance, raised to identify an enemy no matter how polished his uniform. It is my deepest regret that the greatest enemy I ever faced was the man who slept beside me." Hogan collapsed onto the railing of the dock, his shoulders shaking. He had lost everything: the promotions, the money, the mistress. Most importantly, he had lost the title of soldier, the very thing he had used to mask his rotten core. The head judge stood and read the verdict in a clear, unwavering voice. Based on the evidence presented and the strict regulations of the United States Army, this panel finds the defendant guilty. It is the decision of this court to strip Derek Hogan of his rank, to dishonorably discharge him from the service, and to sentence him to federal prison for charges of embezzlement and abuse of power. Tiffany Monroe is found guilty as an accessory and will also serve a prison sentence. The gavel struck the block with a sharp, definitive crack. It was the sound that ended a disgraceful career. Hogan crumpled to the floor. The MPs had to haul him to his feet. As he was dragged past Eleanor, he looked up at her with red, hollow eyes, but she had already turned away, her gaze fixed on the sunlight streaming through a high window. The verdict of honor had been delivered. Hogan would face years behind bars, with nothing but time to regret trading a diamond for a shard of glass. But as General Vance had said, regret often comes only when there is nothing left to lose, not from a true recognition of wrongdoing. Major General Vance stood, took his daughter's hand, and led her from the courtroom. As they walked down the hall, young officers snapped to attention and saluted. Eleanor felt a great weight lift from her. The burden of 10 years, the shame of betrayal, the suppression of her own identity, it all dissolved with the sound of the judge's gavel. "You did well, Eleanor," the general said quietly as they reached the grand entrance. "Today, you didn't just win justice for yourself. You defended the integrity of the uniform. That is a soldier's greatest victory." Eleanor smiled, a smile as radiant as a wildflower after a storm. She looked down at her hands. The wedding ring was gone, leaving only the faint calluses of a soldier accustomed to hard work. She knew that back at the brigade she would face stares and whispers, but she was no longer afraid. She was standing on her own 2 feet, no longer in the shadow of her father or leaning on the arm of a traitor. At the courthouse gate, a military ambulance was arriving from a border region. Seeing the young, weary but resolute faces of the soldiers on the stretchers, Eleanor felt a lump form in her throat. She made a silent vow. The assets recovered from Hogan's fraudulent debt agreement would be used entirely to upgrade the medical facilities at the most remote outposts. It was the only way she could atone for her misplaced faith. The general's car pulled away. In the rearview mirror, Eleanor saw Hogan and Tiffany being led to separate transport vehicles, heading in 2 different directions, 2 corrupted souls for whom there was no cure. She took a deep breath of the clean morning air, feeling life surge powerfully through her. Her life, from this moment on, was turning to a new, unblemished, and proud new page. After the verdict, the oppressive cloud hanging over the base finally lifted. The whispers and gossip faded, replaced by a quiet respect for the woman who had walked through fire and emerged with the unblemished character of a true officer. Eleanor stood in the now empty apartment, a place that had once held all her youthful dreams, and witnessed the decay of a sacred promise. She took a day to clean everything, from the dusty bookshelves to the unit commendations on the wall. She performed the task with the same care one would use to cleanse a wound, preparing it for new skin to grow. Hogan was gone. His office was sealed, his assets seized. His suffocating presence was finally, completely, erased from her life. She looked in the mirror and saw not the lines of sorrow, but the face of Captain Eleanor Vance, a woman who had dared to shatter a beautiful lie to protect a harsh truth. That afternoon, Eleanor submitted a request for a transfer. She didn't choose to stay in the comfortable administrative wing of the brigade. She volunteered for a forward support assignment with an infantry regiment in the rugged mountains of the north, the very region whose soldiers had suffered from Hogan's heartless greed. "Are you sure, Eleanor?" Major General Vance asked as they sat on the porch of his home, surrounded by the familiar scent of roses. "The conditions up there are harsh." "It's not like here." Eleanor looked at her father, her smile as bright as the autumn sun. "Dad, for 10 years I lived in an air-conditioned house, but my soul was a barren desert. I'm not going there to run away. I'm going to pay a debt. I want to see for myself that the recovered funds become medicine and warm blankets for the troops. I am a soldier. The field and the frontier are where I belong, not the kitchen of a faithless man." The general looked at his daughter, his eyes shining with pride. He said nothing more, simply pouring another cup of tea. He knew his wild orchid had truly come into her own. She no longer needed the shade of the great oak tree. She was standing tall on her own, proud and brilliant. The day Eleanor left, the mountain air was crisp, and the sun cast a golden hue over the ancient pines. She shouldered her pack, her short-cropped hair blowing in the wind, and stepped onto the military transport truck heading toward the misty peaks. Her new unit welcomed her with the simple sincerity of soldiers who live close to the earth. They didn't care whose daughter she was. They only knew they had a new administrative officer who was incredibly competent, who would hike through streams to inspect a supply cache, who would stay up all night to balance rations, ensuring every soldier was cared for. During the long mountain nights, Eleanor would write in her journal by the light of a single lamp. She no longer wrote of loneliness or betrayal. She wrote of the green shoots of corn growing in rocky soil, of the smiles of new recruits receiving fresh uniforms, of the sacred feeling of standing under the flag at a windswept mountain pass. She realized that happiness wasn't having a high-ranking husband with a polished image, but the peace that comes from living a life of honor and purpose. Months later, a letter arrived from an old colleague. Hogan had received a lengthy prison sentence. Tiffany, as an accomplice, had also been incarcerated. The letter said that in prison, Hogan had completely broken down, screaming Eleanor's name in his sleep. Reading this, Eleanor felt nothing but a calm detachment. Hogan was now just a faded name from her past, a painful lesson she had courageously overcome. Standing on a high ridge overlooking the valley where her unit was based, Eleanor felt like a phoenix. She had to tear away her own tainted feathers, endure the searing pain of betrayal, only to be reborn from the ashes, stronger and more vibrant than before. Eleanor's story closes, but it opens onto a quiet truth. Life has a way of balancing the scales. Karma may be slow, but it never forgets an address. Those who sow betrayal will reap disgrace. And a woman's true strength is found not by leaning on a powerful man, but in the courage to command her own destiny. Like Eleanor, be a soldier on the battlefield of your own life. Patience is not weakness. It is the gathering of strength. Silence is not surrender. It is the quiet observation of truth. And when the storm comes, stand tall, with integrity as your weapon and honor as your shield. After the rain, the sun will shine again on the mountainside. And the flowers that bloom on bare rock are always the most resilient and the most beautiful. Eleanor Vance walked on, following the frontier road. Beneath her feet was the solid earth. On her shoulders was the untarnished honor of a soldier, and in her heart, an eternal spring had just begun.